Next on the agenda, we have a duo of esteemed authors who will be delving into the thought-provoking question: can blockchain ease intra-regional trade in the Caribbean? I suspect I know the answer. The issue is how. So let's hear this discussion. Let me introduce our speakers. Laura Giles Alvarez and Marcos Allende Lopez are each incredible in their own right, but together their minds have made some exciting discoveries. Laura is the country economist at the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, country office in Haiti. She previously worked as a country economist in the Barbados and the Bahamas country offices, and also as a young professional in the Social Protection and Health Division and the Economics team at the Caribbean Country Department at the IDB. Laura has experience as an economist in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, so she is global, focusing on public financial management and fiscal policy. Now, Marcos is an IT blockchain specialist at the IDB. He's been the technical leader of more than 20 blockchain projects implemented in Latin America and the Caribbean. Trained as a quantum physicist, Marcos specialized in applying emerging technologies in development projects and has published several articles and papers on blockchain, SSI, and quantum technology, focusing on their potential for social impact. Let's welcome them for this riveting discussion. I'm predicting it will be riveting. Can blockchain ease intra-regional trade in the Caribbean?
Thank you very much for the organizers of the event. Thank you for having us today. So my name is Laura Giles Alvarez, and I will be starting today the presentation regarding the results of a paper we published last year with various colleagues in the region, titled "A Caribbean Settlement Network: Can Blockchain Ease Inter-Regional Trade in the Caribbean?" So the aim of the study was to evaluate the potential value of adopting blockchain-based technologies for inter-regional cross-border transactions in the CARICOM region, and thus informing a Caribbean Settlement Network working group, which was a group of different experts, different professionals that we got together in Barbados to discuss the potential use of technology in easing trade in the region. So the aim of the study, and this was the technical contribution IDB did to the working group, was, first of all, is there potential for blockchain-based technology to develop a Caribbean settlement network? And secondly, what are the potential returns to using this technology in interregional trade in the Caribbean? This paper was not only used for this working group, it also aligns with the Vision 2025, which is one of our institutional mandates in using technology and supporting regional trade and promotion. So as a bit of a context, despite high dependence on trade, Caribbean countries face high non-tariff trade costs. And just a bit of an explanation for those who are not economists, we have seen that trade in the Caribbean is much higher than in other regional blocs and other countries in the world, and it has been increasing across time. And this has been partly due to the fact that tariff barriers, which are, for example, the duties that we pay for imports and exports, have been reducing in the CARICOM region over the past few years. And that is partly due to CARICOM and various agreements in the region. However, non-tariff trade costs have been increasing across time and more pose a burden. I'm going to go into what are non-tariff trade costs in my next slides, but just to give you a bit of a flavor, trade is extremely high in the region. Non-tariff trade costs are more and more becoming a burden. However, intra-regional trade is only 10% of total trade in the region, so it's quite limited. And even within this inter-regional trade, it is highly concentrated. So, for example, Trinidad and Tobago has about 70% of the exports, inter-regional exports across CARICOM countries, whereas Jamaica and Guyana compose about 50% of imports. And going back to what are non-tariff trade costs. So non-tariff trade barriers are different factors that affect trade across countries and that are not related to duties that importers and exporters pay. And the literature highlights distance and culture, exchange rates, and particularly the fluctuations and the hedging against these fluctuations, transfer fees, and required documentation, which is very burdensome in the region, as some of the main non-tariff trade costs that affect trade flows in the Caribbean region. And how do we estimate the impact of non-tariff trade barriers on intra-regional CARICOM trade? Well, we do so through a two-step panel regression gravity model with 15 CARICOM countries between 2006 and 2015. I'm not quite sure why the equations aren't coming out on this presentation, but here basically what we come to do is we regress bilateral trade across two countries at time t with the different non-tariff barriers that I just described in my previous PowerPoint slide. And we use fixed effects for importers and exporters. And fixed effects are composed generally of country-specific factors, including GDP. And what do we find? So our results, which are what's of interest here in this forum, are that all four non-tariff trade barriers that I just described have negative effects on trade in interregional trade in the Caribbean. And therefore, reducing these non-tariff barriers could lead to an increase in trade. We conducted various scenarios, assuming that the use of technology would reduce non-tariff barriers. So, for example, in documentation, the processes could be easier. There could be more information between the various parties. There could be a reduction, for example, in the differences and the asymmetries of information that are happening between all the players. And this could reduce the non-tariff trade barriers. And if we were to reduce up to 50% the value of these non-tariff trade barriers, the cumulative effect on trade between 2006 and 2015 would have been almost 50% higher trade volume for intra-regional trade than we otherwise would have seen if the non-tariff barriers kept the same. The more striking result is if we were to include not just regional partners, but also major trading partners such as the US or Canada, the cumulative effects on trade of reducing non-tariff barriers would be much, much higher. So for the same exercise, if we were to reduce non-tariff barriers through the use of distributed ledger technologies or blockchain technologies, the cumulative effects of trade could be as high as 100% for a 50% reduction scenario. So the key takeaway to take here is not only could distributed ledger technology have a positive effect in reducing non-tariff barriers and therefore have the potential to increase trade, the impact would be much larger if we were to consider not just intra-regional partners, but also external partners such as the US and Canada. And I'll pass on to my colleague Marcus.
Thank you so much, Laura. Yes, so when we published this paper a couple of years ago, we did this investigation about what was the status or the state of the different CBDC initiatives around the world. CBDCs are basically central bank digital currencies, are known as a new type of digital money that is supported directly by the central bank, and that can be either provided in a retail manner by the central banks or intermediated by commercial banks to the end users. Since 2016, there's been different central banks around the world piloting this type of initial issuances of these digital money currencies. Also, motivated by the rise of cryptocurrencies and by the level of adoption worldwide of cryptocurrencies. And actually, one of these initiatives is happening in the Caribbean, and is the Sand Dollar. The Sand Dollar in Bahamas is one of the most advanced, actually, CBDCs that is providing a digital currency in production for the citizens of the country, and it has been evolving since 2020 when we published the paper a lot. In the other initiatives around the world working with CBDCs are more in a piloting stage, and it is not 100% clear yet how they will become a productive solution for operating digital money at a country level, and also how these CBDCs can also be interoperated between countries, enabling these cross-border payments. But definitely, it is a very good way of connecting or involving the role of the central bank in this possibility of easing the cross-border payments and the cross-border settlements between settlements, particularly in the Caribbean. So now, in the next slide, we would like to talk a little bit about what's this blockchain technology that is underlying these CBDCs, these digital money solutions that can enable a better cross-border payments and cross-border settlements between different countries. Blockchain technology is basically a technology that allows to build a decentralized ledgers. These decentralized ledgers are basically like a version of a decentralized spreadsheet where different entities can write and read information, and there's different roles that can operate certain tasks in the network, like maintenance or support, and also there are certain roles that can update specific information in the network. For example, if we have a blockchain network and we have an authority like a central bank or a financial institution or a commercial bank that has a particular role to operate some instance of digital money, only that entity will be able to operate that kind of digital money in the network and define the rules under which that digital money is going to be minted, and it's going to be burned, and it's going to be distributed and transferred or transacted between the different users in the network. When we think about how to do digital money on blockchain, we also need to understand what are the types of blockchain networks that are available for this purpose, because there's actually at least 3 different types of blockchain networks that are very different between each other. Just to give you an idea, today in the world, you can find more than 15,000, 20,000 different blockchain networks. And there's a taxonomy or a classification by International Standards Organization, the ISO, that establishes 3 groups of blockchain networks. The first group of blockchain networks are permissionless blockchain networks. Permissionless blockchain networks are typically the networks associated to cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. These are permissionless blockchain networks. Why? Because nobody needs to give permission to anyone to really access this network. So these networks are fully open, are fully decentralized, and are fully transparent. The bad things about these networks are that they don't have low transaction fees. Typically in Bitcoin or in Ethereum, you're going to have to be paying an average of $5 to $10 every time you want to register something in that network, or you want to transact something in that network. For example, every time you want to send money using these networks, you're going to have to pay a transaction fee between $5 and $10, which is very expensive when you are thinking about micropayments. Also, these networks are crypto related, meaning that these fees, actually, you're going to have to pay them using cryptocurrency. So for institutions, maybe for individuals, it's easier to hold cryptocurrency, but for some private and public institutions, having a person or a group of people that have access to a private key that can control the cryptocurrency of the institution and operating the network using that cryptocurrency is not something that is very easy to establish from a governance perspective. Also, in terms of anonymity, these networks are in principle fully anonymous, meaning that they cannot be easily regulated, because if it is not people are not working authenticated or identified in the network, it is difficult to know who is doing something that is wrong or who is attacking the network, and therefore pursue that entity or individual from a legal perspective. And finally, these networks don't have privacy enabled. Privacy meaning, for example, the trace of the transactions. So all the trace of the transactions is there, and you can, if you discover who is behind a specific account, a blockchain account, you can find out all the transaction history of that person in the ledger, who is not desirable, in order to keep some privacy around the financial the financial information related to an individual and a company. So this is the first type of blockchain networks. There's a second type of blockchain networks that are actually permission and private. So basically, they are the opposite. We can see that in the features there. So the permission private blockchain networks are not public, are not decentralized, and are not very transparent. This is the typical blockchain network that you hire a vendor and they implement like 4 or 5 nodes in your company, in another 2 companies, for example, or in the government and in a private sector company or within a university. It's like a very restricted blockchain network that is for a consortia or that is for a group of entities that are doing a project together. The good thing about this is here everyone knows everyone, so there's private, so there's no anonymity. Also, the network is private, so privacy is enabled by default. There's not a cryptocurrency related, and usually you don't pay transaction fees. Like these entities that are operating the network use it for free. The problem with these networks is that they can also become very difficult to govern, and they can be also very difficult to scale, because when it comes the decision about allowing a new entity to enter, or who should be supporting the entire network or each of the entities in the network, there are some issues that are not clear to establish, and even the financial sustainability of the network can be an issue sometimes. Historically, the first networks that appeared in the world were the permissionless, with Bitcoin in 2008 and with a series of other crypto-related networks from 2008 to 2015. Then some permission private appeared in 2015. And finally, in 2017, 2018, when people started understanding better blockchain technology and started to think about initiatives that were more transversal and were more multi-purpose, like, for example, central bank digital currencies, or doing cross-border payments, or remittances, or even doing a settlement on chain for retail payments using blockchain technology. People started developing something called permission public blockchain networks. Permission public are networks that in principle are as accessible and as open as the permissionless, because everyone can access, they are decentralized and they are transparent, but at the same time they are certain rules in the network. For example, that entities need to operate in the network in an authenticated manner, and that cryptocurrency has been disabled from the network. In this case, there's no transaction fees. You can know who is in the network, so you can regulate it, you can pursue activities and accountabilities, and finally you can have privacy enabled. So indeed, one of the most important permission public networks, there's not many. There's one big effort in Europe called European Blockchain Service Infrastructure. There's one in Spain called Alastria. There's a similar effort in China called Blockchain National Services, BNS. And there's a big initiative, probably the biggest one of all of these, which is happening in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it is called LACCHAIN. If we go to the next slide. LACCHAIN is an initiative that was launched by the Inter-American Development Bank in 2019. In the IDB, we've been working with blockchain technology since about 2017, putting it into different projects around Latin America and the Caribbean. And actually, we found out that these two first types of blockchain network, the crypto-related and the very private, were not ideal for blockchain projects with impact on development and on inclusion. And so we, developed, the IDB Lab launched this program called LACCHAIN in 2019 to develop the ecosystem and to develop infrastructure. The infrastructure that has been developed and provided since 2019 to any entity in Latin America and the Caribbean has actually been recognized by the by the International Telecommunications Union from the United Nations as one of the 14 infrastructures of reference in the world, together with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other initiatives in that list. If we go to the next slide. Thank you, Laura. So after 3 years, this initiative that is available for, again, all the entities operating in Latin America and the Caribbean has achieved the development and the deployment of 7 blockchain networks. There's more than 50 blockchain projects operating in these networks, more than 750 entities in the ecosystem, more than 80 entities running nodes, 34 projects of these 50 have impact on inclusion, and there's 9 countries building ecosystem. Out of these 50 projects, some important projects are actually happening in the Caribbean. For example, 2 of the most important projects on academic diplomas. that are having academic entities issuing basically digital diplomas that are verifiable to digital wallets of the citizens. And those verifiable diplomas can be verified by any entity against the blockchain network. There's these two projects, one by the University of West Indies and the other one by CXC, the Caribbean Examinations Council, that are a reference not only for the region but also internationally on how to issue digital verifiable diplomas. Also, there's this project for the traceability of sugar in Belize that is working in the blockchain ecosystem. And there's another project on parametric insurance that is basically enabling numeric distribution of insurances after a natural disaster happening in Bahamas. So many projects are already happening in the Caribbean within this infrastructure and this global alliance that is blockchain. Laura, please. Thank you. Just to give you an idea, you can see there in the main network of these 7 that are available, you can see there where are the nodes distributed. Most of them are located in the eastern coast of the US just because they are using cloud services from cloud providers. But these are nodes that are operated from the Caribbean, Latin America, and you can also see activity from Europe and even from the US. There's 75 organizations in this network. And if we go to the next slide too, we can see that the average of transactions, not only financial transactions, but any type of information recorded in the network, average or gave a total of close to 36,000 registrations in the network in the month of March from these different projects. In the next slide, but before I pass it back to Laura to go to the conclusions, I would like to say that, again, this infrastructure that has been made available for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is blockchain, is available for any private, public entity or academic entity. And if you want to do, for example, piloting any initiative related to cross-border payment, to easier trade by enabling digital payments or cross-border settlements using blockchain technology, this infrastructure is available and can be used by any entity. So we are happy to not only contribute with this research, but also provide this technological resource that you can use in order to move forward with some of these ideas in practice. So now back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Marcos. So just to wrap up quickly, the conclusions of our paper, as we discussed, we found that non-tariff trade barriers that we analyzed, that included distance and culture, exchange rates, transfer fees, and required documentation, have a negative effect on trade and could be positively affected by distributed ledger technology, therefore reducing red tape, increasing speed of transaction efficacy, etc., and thus allowing the space for distributed ledger technology to have a positive effect on interregional trade. Although there are potential gains for interregional trade in the CARICOM region, the paper also suggests that expanding the number of countries that participate in these transactions would lead to even greater returns. Therefore, whenever the region is thinking of putting together these kind of platforms for transactions using DLT, distributed ledger technology, we would strongly recommend to make sure large trading partners like the United States or Canada are members or participate in these activities. However, challenges remain. The required upfront financial investment to design and maintain blockchain applications is still really high. There is limited literature on the cost-benefit analysis of such initiatives for the use of blockchain in trade, and particularly so for the Caribbean region. So this is where we sort of bring to the attention to everybody today that this is an extremely important area where we need more evidence to really beef up these kind of initiatives and support this kind of research. And finally, the legislative and regulatory frameworks for countries really need to be harmonized in order for these kind of initiatives to become a reality. Blockchain Global Alliance and blockchain infrastructure can be very useful resource for blockchain-based initiatives in the Caribbean region focused on trade. And we really invite everybody to visit our website, find out more about what we're doing, and you can download the publication with all the underlying data at the IDB Publications website. So next steps. Based on these results, we really recommend building on more advanced experiences of blockchain technologies in other regions and generating more evidence for our region. Make sure we have strong and committed governance structures, public acceptance, and championship authorities, both for greater regional integration through trade and for the increased use of distributed ledger technology. And finally, updating and harmonizing countries' regulatory frameworks, ensuring compatibility both within the region, but as what we've said, with other major trading partners. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure participating today, and we hope you will have a very good rest of the week.
Thank you very much, Marcus and Laura. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and to our participants, let you know that we have quite a bit of time in this segment as well. So get your questions out there. This is a really interesting discussion. Let me start with a question coming from Chris. To the non-technical business decision maker or policy maker, blockchain might sound scary. Are there any programs in the region to help them with education and awareness?
I can take that one, Laura. Yes, so what I would say is that since a few years ago, there's been a lot of effort from the public and the private sector to understand better the technology. I would say that there was a turning point in 2019 where Facebook tried to launch Libra, which was going to be this cryptocurrency backed by a basket of assets. So I think for those of us that were in the blockchain ecosystem by that time, we saw a very important turning point where regulators really were required to understand what was going on. There are some countries that are having conversations about blockchain technology from a policy perspective, and there's two international entities that are doing a very important also effort trying to generate discussions, conversations, and material that others can follow. These are the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So for any policymaker or any entity interested in knowing more about the use of blockchain technology for these things, from the people that know most, I really recommend checking on the BIS and on the IMF in order to have a good reference.
Next question comes from WB, who says, how does a small business access the IDB assistance with blockchain?
Yeah, okay. So basically what I would say is this infrastructure that has been made available, that is the blockchain infrastructure for Latin America and the Caribbean, is an infrastructure that is available for any entity. There's two types of networks there. There's the testing networks where anyone can join, deploy their solutions, and doing 100% for free. There's no transaction fees, no membership fees. You don't need to pay anything at all. This is an infrastructure that has been made available as a public good. If you go to the LACChain website or to the LACnet website, LACnet is LACnet, that's LACnet, and LACChain was what I was showing before. So you can go to those two websites, and there you can join. You can find the resources to join these two networks. So as I was saying, the test networks, you just need to sign like an agreement form that you are okay with the terms and conditions, and you are saying who you are as an entity and who are your focal points. And with that, you can proceed, deploy your nodes, and experiment in the network. Now, if you want to use the mainnet environment, there's a very small membership fee between 1,000 and 15,000 a year, depending on the type of use of the network you can do. And with that, you will be able to operate in production with technical support and with a very, very robust legal framework. So just check those two websites, and there you will find the resources to join each of these networks.
Okay, and if you are able to, it would help if you could just type it in the chat, type the website in the chat so that people can, copy that and paste it into their browser. The next question comes from Dayton, who wants to know, oh, well, it's not a question, it's really a comment. He says, the Caribbean imports and exports data is a little hard to believe.
So thank you so much. The paper is in the resources website of the conference. Please bear in mind this is percentage of GDP, so these are not absolute figures. But please feel free to download the study, have a look at it. All sorts of data are quoted there, and you can check with much more detail all the different data points and graphs we have presented today.
Lisa also has, well, a comment on a similar matter. She says, I wonder where the data is from. It's unfortunate that we import from all over the world and not from each other. Then we have a follow-up question from WB. Are there any restrictions that came up on your survey, such as size or product type?
I understand they are referring to the different CBDCs or the different initiatives provided. No, we just try to highlight and recognize the ones that were having more impact by the time of the paper. And of course, in these last 2 years, there's been also a lot of activity and other initiatives that are emerging. So we recommend not only to, if people are looking forward not only to the study that we did, but also to specific references on CBDCs and on digital money initiatives. We also recommend to check on these sources that I was mentioning before, the BIS, the IMF, in order to get the gap between the publication and today.
I also wanted to highlight one restriction we did apply was we only mentioned those for which there was robust published public available data, right? So, or documents describing these initiatives. So please bear in mind this is changing almost monthly. At the time of writing was changing, and there were more and more initiatives, but we only really considered at the time those that had published information from the issuing agencies available to review. So there's probably many more.
You are muted, Kalaya.
Yeah, let me also mention that the links that Marcus mentioned, you will be able to access those in the resources section of the page. All right. So the next question comes from Trevor Forrest. There is still a deficit in understanding the real benefits of blockchain over and above fintech. How does IDB see itself playing a role in increasing the modes of awareness of this revolutionary technology?
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, in following this publication that we are presenting today, there's also been a lot of effort from different departments, from the financial market division, to generate knowledge around these topics. If you go to the IDB website and in the same place that you can find the resource of this paper, you will be also able to find other resources, additional resources that are covering information on this topic from the IDB.
I also wanted to highlight that these are multi-sectoral issues. So this team that published this paper was composed of different departments, from more classic economics departments to more sort of cutting-edge IT departments. So I would really encourage everybody in this forum to pair up, reach out to your universities. Don't be scared. There's a lot of interest on these issues, and there's a lot to be gained from different points of view.
Trevor has a related question. He says, how would federated blockchain networks benefit cross-border trade in CARICOM and beyond, especially as it relates to supply chain, etc., and other non-fintech space?
Yes, so by federated is a name that is usually attributed to this third group that we were presenting, the permission public. It's also been associated to the permission private. But if we think about, the permission public, that are the ones that, for example, Action is following, the good things about these federated networks is that you can have the best of the accessibility to the network, the transparency, and the decentralization, because you can make them in a way that everyone can access information and can register information under certain rules. But also, if you introduce a layer of authentication and identification for the entities using it, you can also have accountability and regulation, which are very important things that you need in order to do digital payments. Because in order to be compliant with regulation, you are going to need to be able to accomplish KYC, to accomplish AML, to guarantee rights of data protection over the information related to financial information by entities and individuals. So the good thing about more federated blockchains are those. You combine the openness, but you also combine the regulatory compliance that you can get. And finally, one good thing about federations is that the motivations of the participants to be maintaining the network can be different from just being rewarded with cryptocurrency, which is what happens in the crypto-based networks. So when you eliminate the concept of a cryptocurrency to motivate the participants and to pay for the mining of the validators, you reduce the transaction fees, and you can even eliminate the transaction fees. And when you are thinking about enabling a blockchain network for digital payments, having transaction fees that are high can be a very important limitation in order to have a retail solution for digital payments.
In the case of the Caribbean, just adding on, this has exceptional benefits that could be reaped by many of the countries. As we all know, doing business indicators tend to be quite low for many of these countries, and the time and cost of trading and doing business across countries is extremely high and is increasing with KYC and AML compliance requirements. So there really could be a lot of benefits for the Caribbean region in particular.
The next question comes from Peter Wright, and I'm smiling because Peter, you're really asking an essay question here, but we have time. So Peter says, "Good morning, Marcus. Excellent presentation. Would you be kind enough to compare and contrast El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin with the Lightning Network with our own Jamdex CBDC implementation, please?" First, let me just note, Peter, that CBDC Jamdex hasn't been implemented in Jamaica yet. We're still awaiting the actual implementation at the end of this month, according to the presenters yesterday.
Yeah, so that's a great question, but from my technical role, it's not my position to answer that question on behalf of the IDB. So anything related to IDB policy on this type of matters would come officially from the bank. But thank you for the question anyway.
Laura, anything you can contribute on that?
I have that's the same answer as Marco. So any position of the kind is an institutional position. We'd have to wait for the IDB to have an official stance, particularly as this relates to two member countries of the
Right.
The IDB.
Right. And like I was saying, CBDC hasn't actually been implemented here yet. It is planned for implementation very soon. Carlton Lawrence wants to know, will blockchain tech make money laundering easier or harder? It's a great question, Carlton.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a very good question. Look, in the end, blockchain is a technology. And as all technologies, it always depends on how you implement it. If you implement a bad technological solution, that's always going to have more vulnerabilities than the previous solution. But if you use technology for good, you understand what are the limitations and the weaknesses of the technology, and you try to cover them in a way that you are not exposing those limitations. You can always benefit from the use of that technology to have benefits in these areas and in other areas. So I wouldn't think that there's a unique solution about if the technology is better or worse for example, EML or KYC or these things. I would just say that focus on understanding well the problem, the solution, the technology, and the implementation, and trying to basically address all your weaknesses.
Because there's been this concern that cryptocurrency facilitates illegal activities because it's decentralized. Criminals, it is said, tend to gravitate towards it. Is there any actual evidence of this that you're aware of?
Well, again, this is from an official position, as we are representing the IDB here. It is not our role to address those questions. But I would invite everyone that is curious to read different sources to understand well what are the technologies, what are the cryptocurrencies that are available, and how these things are happening, and try to also separate the cryptocurrencies from the technology, from the different projects and solutions using the blockchain technology with and without cryptocurrencies, and evaluate that as independent things.
And next question comes from Omari, who says BCT, not sure if that's a typo, it might be BTC, Bitcoin, has the potential to facilitate greater cross-border trade, especially remittances for intra-Caribbean investors, and ultimately reduce the dependence on foreign currency for regional growth. The question is, how far away are we from such a future, and what can companies and lobbyists do to speed up such a transition?
Yeah, so again, we want to focus here more on the technology and the analysis of the technology, not on a particular solution or cryptocurrency. We believe from the results of the study that blockchain technology as a technology, right, without the specific implementations, can be good for easing trade in the Caribbean. And that's what we invite you to take a look at in the study. I don't know if Laura wants to.
Yeah, if I can add, this relates at the end of the day to our recommendations, right? So whether it's trade or any other financial transaction, the regulatory frameworks need to be updated, and the basic infrastructure underlying these kind of transactions really needs to be updated, and that could be costly. So that's the first initial discussion to have, how to do that, where the investment comes from, making sure they're all harmonized across countries in order to really start conceptualizing what this kind of transactions in a distributed ledger would look like.
You know, as I'm listening to the discussion, I keep thinking about the CSME. And when the CSME was conceptualized, Caribbean Single Market and Economy, there was also this thought that we would eventually have a single currency. That has not happened, and it doesn't seem likely that it will ever happen for various reasons. But perhaps not a digital currency that is region-wide rather than each individual country adopting their own CBDC. Perhaps a regional digital currency could be the solution. What do you think?
All of these things have to be analyzed, in detail for each solution. But as the report says and proves, at least the use of the technology, the blockchain technology, can be beneficial. Then each potential implementation with using the technology would need to be analyzed, right? But the technology can be useful. That's the highlight, I think.
Yeah, and if I can add, I mean, the possibilities are endless, right? It's very exciting to have these new technologies, the possible uses for it, what it could work. It will work for some things and not for others. It's difficult to speculate at this point, but it's fantastic to put ideas on the table. And so going back again, as I referred to before, the conclusions, you need to bring the regulators on board, you need to bring governments on board, you need to bring more classical financial institutions on board in order to start having these discussions. And that's really groundbreaking work that has to continue happening. And having the possibility of these kinds of studies, these kinds of forums, really allow us to do that. And we thank you so much for the invitation, and we hope to be able to still continue discussing these issues on such forums.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Marcus. Very interesting discussion. Like you said, it's easy to speculate, but it's great to imagine the possibilities. And that's why we have conversations like these.